Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Kobold. Oh no, I dropped something. Welcome back to Kobold Chats, everybody. My name is Kendrick or Kendo, whichever you prefer. I use they, he pronouns, and I'm glad to see you again on another Wednesday, middle of the week, halfway through it, the weekend just over the horizon. And hopefully, this will be a nice little respite for you if you're doing lunch, if you're doing, if you work from home, whatever it is you're doing, or if you're sneaking and watching this at work. I'm not going to tell anyone, so your secret's safe with me. I am very excited for today. If you did, okay, wait. First and foremost, if you didn't already know, the Tales of the Valiant Game Master's Guide Kickstarter is live. Not only is it live, first and foremost, it funded in under 30 minutes. And that's thanks to a lot of you. And I'm like, it's absolutely amazing. I think like right now we're like halfway past 200,000. I think we're slowly eking our way to 300,000. If you haven't already gone to back the Game Master's Guide, first of all, what are you doing? Second of all, I just put a link in there so you can go check it out. The Game Master's Guide is the next book in the Tales of the Valiant series. Do you need it to play Tales of the Valiant? No. But if you play Tales of the Valiant, D&D 5th edition, or honestly, really, if you're facilitating any fantasy adventure campaign, regardless of the game, there's a lot of the Game Master's Guide that I think is going to be very useful for you because it kind of runs the gambit from everything of how to run games, how to interact with players, how to identify the different kinds of players and be able to meet their needs, how to world build, how to up your combat, how to create puzzles, how to do traps, how to do, like, there's so much that is just generally useful for any game master across the board. And I like, as a forever GM myself, it will be opened a lot for me. I don't know about all of you, but I know for me, I will be using it a lot. So go ahead and look. We understand the player's handbook and the monster vault are not out yet, right? You don't have them, so maybe you feel a little hesitant to back this, right? That's understandable. You do not have to back it. This is just going to be the cheapest you're going to be able to get it for like a decent bit, right? So if you want to check it out, please, the link is right there in the chat. There is a preview actually to the Game Master's Guide, so you can be able to see like all like the outline of like, oh, it's going to be this chapter. It's going to have like this, and then and I think there's some monster templates in there as well, kind of showing you the ways in which the book helps you like be able to, oh, you want to make a new monster, or you want to change a monster from one thing to kind of make it something else. Hey, you can get a little bit. I think there are undead templates in there, which I've already talked about. I love undead. They're my favorite type of creature. So go on, check that out there. Hello, RP Jesters, and a lot of new faces. I'm glad you all are here. I am very, very. If it's not obvious, I'm really excited about it. Sorry, my brain's lagging a little bit today. That's just kind of how it is. But is there anything else I need to tell you? Yes, actually. Other than the Game Master's Guide, I've been talking a lot about the the Kobold Guide to Role Playing, which one of our guests today actually did some writing on that as well. The Kobold Guide to Role Playing is out of pre-order phase. It is, you can just go get it. It's in the Kobold Press store right now. You can go get it. I did an interview last week with Gygax talking about his work on it. And I have another interview next week talking a little bit more about it as well. But it's a secret. I can't tell you who it is yet. But if you are interested in trying to figure out like, oh, like what is in this book, you can go and watch the previous Kobold Chats. It's both in the Twitch like VOD archive system, and it's also over on our YouTube, which you can go subscribe right now. So that is a lot of fun. Artorias, hello Artorias, good to see you again. I'm also excited about the new GM guide. Just waiting for my guide to role playing to write. Yeah, I'm also waiting for I got a bunch of Kobold guides recently, which I'm going to be opening up very soon. I love essays. Non-ironically. I'm not actually new face. I'm just, hey, understandable bunkerlicious. Okay, you know what? I've held it off too much. It is time to introduce two amazing writers who have done lots of work with Kobold Press in the past, and hopefully will continue to do lots of work with us in the future, and who have done amazing work on the book we're talking about today, The Game Master's Guide. May I introduce Basheer Ghouse and Mike Shea. Thank you both so much for being here with me today.
Having me.
Of course. Sorry, yes. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. You picked up a copy of Prepared. Our group is eager to... Oh, yes. I love Prepared. Amazing. But, sorry, I'm going to focus now. My ADHD getting a little bit ahead of me. I'm going to focus here on these two amazing people. Now, would you like to introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about the work you've done in the past and the work that you did on the book. Basheer, since it'll be easier if I just choose a person to go first. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Basheer Ghouse. I am a freelance writer, game designer, and cultural consultant. I've been working in TTRPGs for going on 5 years now, 4.5 years or so. I wrote the world building chapter for the Game Master's Guide, and I've been freelancing for Kobold Press since I got into the industry. I've done a lot of freelancing with them in the past, freelanced on Guide to Role Playing, among other things, and I'm really happy with some of the stuff I managed to get into the world building chapter for this book.
Yeah. And Mike?
So I'm Mike Shea. I write for the website Sly Flourish. I wrote a book called Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, which a lot of people know me by. The whole GM advice racket is something that I've been in for 15 years or so. And so being able to write on a GM's guide is right up my alley. Really fun to write. I got lots of things I want to say. And it was definitely a bit of the dog catching the car, though, which I'm happy to talk about.
Yeah.
And freelance for I've done a bunch of work for Kobold Press in the past. I did some work for Wizards of the Coast back in the 4th edition days. I've MCDM, a bunch of other companies that I freelance for, but I mostly work on my own books from published on Sly Flourish.
Yeah, you two are perfect people to be writing on this book. Like, you all have been doing some amazing work for years now, right? That has been, like, one of the things that I love about Kobold Press before I was working here, so I promise you it is, like, with as little bias as possible, is that a lot of Kobold Press books is, like, I have always viewed Kobold Press's work as this huge toolbox for basically anyone, and you can take as much or as little as you want from it, but it's always helped me make my games better, right? Be able to, whether that be, like new ideas for monsters and realizing like, I can like change the way that I play this game that will help make this experience both better for me, but for my players, since I'm a forever GM. And this book is like a lot of that core philosophy that Kobold Press has had kind of distilled down into one amazing 400-page book. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you both today to get a little peek inside the brains of the people who helped make it happen. Still going in alphabetical order. We'll start doing questions now. And also, for everyone in the chat, if you have any questions at any point, please feel more than free. Throw it in, and if we got time, we can go and see if we can get them answered. But my questions come first. So for Basheer, in the world building, the world building chapter, not even just section, chapter, there is a section in it called when to world build, and I'm really interested in like what inspired that, and like what was your goal with trying to teach people when to world build.
So, as any fantasy author or like aspiring DM can tell you, it is very easy to keep world building past the point where any of the details you're making are actually going to show up in your game in any way, shape, or form. And so the point of when to world build is to try to make sure the advice in the chapter contributes directly to your game, And if you want to, you can world build beyond that. But when world build tells you when should you world build, what is the minimum world building you should be doing, or what is a sign that maybe I need to pause and build up this world some more before continuing. What's the minimum you need to start a campaign, etc. It's an argument in favor of like efficiently GMing and saving yourself some work.
Yeah, no, and that makes I'm a primarily improvisational GM, and so like there's a lot of that's hitting home with me, right? Where like I do as much as I can to get it started and then build from there, and I wonder like, is there is there advice in the book on the thing I'm about to ask, but also do you have any advice right now on like helping create that kind, like cultivate the space for that in at your table to like because a lot of what it sounds like you're talking about is the philosophy behind like drawing maps but leaving blank spaces, right? Not getting too deep into the paint where it's like you do all this work and it never shows up. Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it made it through editing, but there is a section on like going out, like looping your players into world building, how to get them invested in world building and helping you world build, and in methods of world building that involve world building at the table and between sessions rather than doing it all beforehand. One of the methods in there is the spiral outward method of world building, which is where you start with a kind of core thing for basically your first session or two, and then you spiral out from that based on what players are interested in, and you can kind of keep building outwards from there rather than doing all the world building ahead of time. So that's definitely one of the options available. One of the but also just creating your full setting but leaving it as brief as you can so that you are saving yourself work is also like, it's not technically leaving yourself blank spaces on the map so you can fill it in later, but you're getting the same effect, since in effect what you're doing is going, these are things I'm not using right now, we can handle it later, even if I already have a good idea of what it's going to be. Mm-hmm. It is not the hard, you should not think about it, but it is instead, you should prioritize what's going to help make this game work for you and for your players.
That's really cool. Yeah, no, I can 100% get behind saving myself time and effort. And
fantastic advice. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for you, Mike, so a lot of what is in the advanced combat section are a lot of like new like tips and rules on how to add not necessarily complexity to combat, but depth to it by adding on layers of like environmental stuff, traps and hazards. I've said it multiple times in our pre-stream call, but the multi phases of combat and like ways in to add a lot of depth to combat. And so I guess my question to you is, for you as someone who facilitates games, someone who runs combat, and someone who writes a lot about it, what is it that makes what makes a memorable combat to you, and like how did that inform how you like wrote your sections of the book and your work in general?
Yeah, sure. I have a funny anecdote, which is a friend of mine who has been playing in my home game for I think like 15 years or so, 15 or 16 years. One time went home and his wife says, so how was the game? He says, oh, it was really great. And she goes, so let me understand, like you go over there every week. He's like, yeah. And it's like, you have for like years now. And he's like, yeah. And you play the same game. And he's like, well, yeah. And she's like, how boring is that? Like going over and playing the exact same game. He's like, well, it's not like that. Like it's totally different every time. Mm-hmm. And that's something where I don't think people can understand it from the outside looking in. Mm-hmm. That the game that we're running is totally, in many cases, very different from session to session.
Yeah.
And if we boil that down to particularly to exploration encounters or combat encounters, that we can think of variables, right? And you ask like what makes combat memorable. I still lean towards the thing that really makes combat memorable is the story that's going on and the fiction that's going on and the descriptions that are going on. And I think you can actually get away with very boring stat blocks and really good narrative and make it feel like it's really, really interesting. Right. I think the players might want some good complexity on their side of the table. I don't know how much complexity they actually need on the opposite side of the table.
Yeah.
But when you do add complexity or add variables, like, so, I like to think of it as kind of adding variables. And you do want, you don't want to always just walk into the 30-foot room with, an equal number of opponents than there are to characters who are roughly of the challenge rating that are appropriate.
Yeah.
You want to mix things up. You want to have bosses. You want to have minions. You want to have different layers of villains, but also you want to shake up the environment. Actually, a good way to look at this is anybody that's been playing Baldur's Gate 3, right? Which I think is it's a law now, right? I think they finally just said everybody has to play Baldur's Gate 3. So like you look at all of the different situations of combat that go on in there where it's like, oh, there's some dudes up in the rafters, or oh, there's like this great big pit they keep kicking me into. Oh, it turns out I can kick them into the pit, right? There's all of these different sort of variables that can go into any given combat encounter that can really make it unique. So yeah, that was a section that I wrote for this book, a setting and terrain section, that talked about what are all of these different things, everything from like the real obvious ones of difficult terrain types, like what are the things where the terrain itself that you're walking on is not there, things like limited visibility, but even like traps. And I like to have it where, traps that are in the middle of a fight, right? So like trapped areas where like you don't want to walk into it, but maybe you'll kick one of the bad guys into the trapped area and the trap goes off. And then, boy, players love that. Like, right. They really love avoiding a trap and then using it against the people that set it is one of the best joys you can give to your players. So don't, I know that there are GMs out there who are like, oh, damn, I really wanted to think of, like, no, man, live in the joy of watching your players be really happy, kicking bad guys into their own traps. They adore that stuff.
Yeah. Sorry. I was going to say, kind of touching on that, like there is, I think, one of the great things that I think I'm seeing in general in the space is like this kind of moving away from GM as antagonist to GM as like to be like a supportive one, right? Like you can put bad things in the way of your players, and like there's something about like using a lot of that, like those variables, especially in combat, but also just in general, that could be a hindrance to the players, but if they're smart and creative, can also use it to their own benefit. And
that's actually like the first section of the setting and terrain chapter or section, small subsection of the setting and terrain section is don't just favor the bad guys. That you're not there just building environments that are making it. And I actually think Baldur's Gate is kind of terrible at this because it's like, why are those guys always up in the rafters, man? When they're so damn far away, I got to make 5 move actions to get up there and hit them. So on the other hand, if you shoot him, Will is really good at knocking him off.
Yeah, you get that repulsive blast, you just knock him off.
That's great fun, right? So yeah. But that big idea of like getting away from the idea of you're just setting up like a pain moment for the players. Doesn't mean you don't you don't never do that, right? Sometimes you put an environment where it's clearly a hard environment for the characters to be able to deal with, compared, lava with a bunch of fire elementals, right? Guess who doesn't care about the lava, right? Yeah. So there are opportunities like that, but it's important. I think it's important, and one of the things I talk about in this chapter is that it's important to shake that up so that you're either, mixing up your environments that are working in favor of the characters or working against the characters, and really fun ones where you change it halfway through. Yeah. Where like it was against you and now there's these snipers that are up that are pegging you with advantage every round, but you get to go up there, knock them off, they fall and die, and then you have advantage on everybody else. Yeah. So fun ways to kind of shake that up. And then discussion of things like, using spell effects as terrain, something that we might not often think about, but, that opportunity where darkness, permanent darkness areas or fog cloud or cloud kill or walls of fire that are up there already and doing terrible things or in your way, and working with that. Like I really, that idea of like looking at spells as a variable that you can use for lots of things other than things the characters can do, like having monsters that are empowered with a spell or having a magic item that has a spell effect that you can do. Like again, Baldur's Gate did lots of this, right?
Yeah,
Spell,
yeah.
you know, weapons with spell effects, and then also tying them to terrain is a really easy way to use spells. You think if every spell is its own tiny little chunk of mechanics that you can apply all over the place in the game, makes it really, really, really valuable. So yeah, I think that idea, and getting back to like my anecdote of the game is different every time, of thinking about, you know, not every battle, right? Not every battle needs to be this perfect set piece thing where you have lots of all these different variables. But for some big ones, it's kind of nice to think about what the environments are. What are some different things you can put in place that's going to make this situation different from any of the other ones that you did?
Yeah, that's yes.
We got a lot of fun ones in here. Really, really cool ones.
Yeah.
Arcane monuments, necrotic zones, arcane instability, crumbling statues. We got a whole list of things with mechanics that are directly in here that you can.
That's so good.
That you can use to shake up your game.
Basheer. So a lot of what the world building chapter, I almost keep calling it section. No, it's a chapter. It's chock full of stuff that you've worked on here. Your chapter kind of breaks down a lot of these ideas, right, into the key components of like, here's what you need to understand about, you know, mapping your world, right? Like the scale of it and like the style of it, which is, I'm interested in, like, when it comes to the styles of mapping your world, like how does that change either like your idea of the world, or how like the world feels both as a GM but also to the players?
So the style of mapping a world is a pretty big part of maps up until basically the modern era. In the modern day, and as a result, in most like modern fantasy fiction, maps tend to be very literal, trustworthy, and representation, right? You have a scale map, you can trust the scale, you can trust locations on it, and you can trust the labels on that map. But that's fairly rare. Before now, the book goes into a couple of different styles, but there's the modern style of mapping where things are accurate and trustworthy, and that gets you a map that like is a directly useful tool, and you can characterize your world by the things that are on the map, but it's mostly a thing for planning out how do you get between place to place. Whereas like pre-modern styles of map, you would have fully relational maps or fully stylistic maps, which weren't much used navigating between places, but told you something about how the people who made that map viewed the world and how it functioned. So this might be something like the old like Great Wheel plane model from older editions of D&D and stuff, where that's not really a very useful thing to figure out how to get between the planes, but it tells you something about how the world is ordered, or at the very least, how the people who made this map of the planes think the world is ordered. They think these planes are opposite each other. They think these planes are closely related, etc. And that's a really useful tool for like characterizing what your world is like, or what the people in it are like. And like old incomplete maps or trade maps, which will have certain parts of it are reliable and will tell you like either the miles between locations on a well-known trade route or in well-marked areas and the like. But other parts are either kind of guessing at what's outside of the boundaries of the map maker's knowledge, or just outright going, we've got no idea what's here. This is beyond the edge of the map, where like people would guess as to what's the shape of the rest of Asia or the rest of Africa or the rest of Antarctica or the rest of the Americas. Or people would guess as to the size of forests because you didn't have like consistent geological surveys as to how big this forest is. And that can tell that, it partially serves the tool purpose of you can plan some trips with this map. You can go along the major trade routes with this map, and you'll know what the next village or big town you should be expecting going this direction is. But if you go even a couple miles off to either side of the road, it's got a very vague idea of what's there. And that's like the famous map of the Hobbit from like, if you ever read an old version of the Hobbit, the original map of the Lonely Mountain, that's a pretty vague map in a lot of ways, or the traditional here there be dragons. Those are maps that are in part used as a tool, but more tell you about like, what are the boundaries of the knowledge of these people, or what did they consider important enough to learn about in detail and record, and what were they willing to go, we've got no idea, or that's scary, good luck, or like ask the local.
Yeah.
Those are all big things about your world that you can get across by just handing the map over to your players and letting them go, hey, what the heck?
Yeah.
If you use a non-standard style of map. And then there's the normal stuff on like how to make maps and how to scale your maps and what sort of maps are useful at different scales and when are you going to use them in a campaign. Because I do try to keep this information like useful to the GM where possible.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. Like, I would love to play in a game without like a standard fantasy map, and it's just like a handful of like these are in fiction like drawn maps. Like, yeah, figure out how far it's gonna be or like where you can go. Because I think that's a really cool, like what you were saying. Like, that's a really cool way to not just characterize like the world and the people in it, right? But it also adds this air of like mystery and adventure and an exploration.
The air of mystery and exploration in your game.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. And like that's just using a map to be able to do it, right? Something that usually like might just be considered like, oh, this isn't like a storytelling tool, right? This is just like a utility tool of like, okay, where are we going from here to here? But I think like that kind of advice is like taking your game to the next level, like finding new ways to add on to the world that you're creating and stuff. And that's I love that. God. Yeah. Mike, you said you said one of my favorite words earlier. And hinted at it with your work on 4th edition. But let's talk minions.
Sure.
Minions were like I got my start in TTRPGs playing 4th edition D&D. That was my first game, and Minions were I tragically dropped since then.
Were they?
What do you mean by that?
We can talk about it.
Please. No, I'm so interested, right? Like, what is it about them? I know what I love about the minion, but for everyone else talking about it, like, what is it about the minion mechanics that you think add to the game? And like, what did you want to bring back with it?
Yeah. So one of the like really common fantasy tropes that we love is the small number of heroes fighting hordes of bad guys, hordes of villains, right? Mm-hmm. My wife is watching the Two Towers, right? And we have the whole Battle of Helm's Deep coming up, where you just got people coming up the bridge and Aragorn and Gimli are knocking them off the sides and doing all kinds of fun stuff. And yet at the core of the game doesn't have a great system. The core rules don't have a great system of representing that style of combat. So, and 4th edition did through the minion mechanic. I argue that the problem with the minion mechanic in 4e was that there were two problems. One is 4th edition was a grid and token and miniature based game. And two is they really went down fast. And those two don't work really well together. For example, I ran a lot of high level 4e and I had like 100 cultists, and I put all the miniatures out of every miniature I had that could even remotely be called a cultist. And my wife and her ranger fired one shot in the air that was like this crazy big area of effect that I think fired an arrow at every target you could see, which was all of them. And so then you're rolling a whole bunch of attacks to figure out which one. And like they all, right? I don't even know if I did like 1 in 20 of them survive, right? But then I took all the miniatures and had put them all back in the box, and that's not, that doesn't scale real well. So 4e had a wonderful system for scaling them if you didn't have to have a bunch of minis. If you do, and there were tricks like, oh, this mini represents four people or anything like that. But they were also a little brittle, right? Like because they only had 1 hit point. They were a little brittle, and it meant that like they almost didn't count at all, right? Like they had so little survivability that it was almost like they were not there at all. And so I gave them like, did we get rid of minions? In the issue with 5e, which is kind of hard to fully get one's head around, is because the math is flatter. It's not flat, but it's flatter than 4E was, or than like Pathfinder is, where you're getting like a direct incremental boost to all of your stats every level. And, you know, you see these like AC 43 kind of creatures. Because you have flatter math, it means that monsters can change their role as the players are leveling up. So I like to use the ogre as an example, right? The ogre is a pretty strong boss monster. Like, it's almost like a solo monster at level 2, if the character's a level 2.
Mm-hmm.
If you're level 6 or 7, or no, if you're level like 4 or 5, it's like an elite monster. You can have a couple of them for every couple of characters, right? You can have one ogre for every couple of characters at that point, and they're probably not going to wipe the characters out. Then at 7 or 8, it's about 1-to-1. Where an ogre is roughly equivalent in power to a single character. You know, maybe I might be, you know, these numbers aren't perfect.
Right.
And then you get to like 14th, 15th, 16th level, and ogres are minions. Like, you can usually hit them with such a big blast of something that you're just going to get rid of them.
Just wipe them out, yeah.
And that's what I mean, that they can churn into minions. And a lot of monsters like this, particularly those like CR 1s and below, are actually minions if you're high enough level. Like, you almost don't have to track them. But what we have in the book here, what I wrote in the book here is, well, okay, how can you scale this thing so you could have basically an unlimited number of monsters, and you're not going to have to, I mean, unlimited is really big, but lots and lots and lots of monsters. Orders of magnitude. You could. Like, in this system, like, because it basically takes a multiplier and turns it into you know, a flat system, you can run hundreds of monsters and not get overburdened with the two big areas, which is, how am I going to roll off 100 attack rolls, and how am I going to track the damage done to 100 different enemies?
Yeah.
Now, there isn't one perfect way, so we offer a few different ways and a few different tools. And those, the two big tools are how to track damage done to an entire horde instead of damage tracked to a single creature. 13th Age actually did a really good job of describing this with their take on what minions do. And basically, you just have one hit point pool, right? Or one damage pool. And every time any of the monsters in the horde take damage, you only track the damage in one tally. When the tally hits enough to cross over the threshold of a monster's hit points, you remove the one that just got hit. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can scale. Now, what do you do if you do enough damage to kill 3 or 4? You kill 3 or 4. What if you get hit with an area of effect? There's a couple different ways, and we talk about in here, how to deal with an area of effect spell. Like, what if you fireball a bunch of guys? Most of the time, if you fireball them, you just take them all away. They're all dead. Right? It's very easy.
Yeah.
But then we do offer the minion template. And the minion template is for those where we're, like we were talking about, where we really like the style and the speed and the simplicity of what 4th edition has. So we have a very simple trait that you apply to a monster, which says, when this creature is successfully hit with an attack or fails a saving throw, it is destroyed, right? So if it takes a hit, it's dead. If it doesn't take a hit, it's not dead. And that works pretty well. Again, none of these are perfect, but that is a very easy way where you don't have to track hit points. And stuff like that. But then the next big part, which 4th edition didn't really deal with, is what do you do about rolls, right? How are you going to do that together? So we have a whole section about how you group your rolls together, that when you have a bunch of minions that are doing a thing, you basically just say, hey, all these skeletons, we're just going to, every 5 skeletons, we're going to group together in a bundle. We're going to roll once for all 5. And if it hits, you take all the damage of the 5. If it misses, you take none of the damage of the 5. You decide how many you want to group in there. And that's based on how many you're using. And the nice thing about that one is you can change that number. It could be many per roll when there's a lot of them, and then you reduce the number per roll until eventually you're back to what the core game has, which is 1 per 1 monster.
Yeah, wow.
So we have the whole section on that. You know, nice, good, juicy discussion about how to, you know, run hordes of monsters to capture that awesome scene.
From MZ.
You know, a bunch of characters fighting just tons and tons and tons of bad guys. So,
yeah, that's I don't think I've ever been. I think I've run a singular combat that has felt like that, right? Where it's been like all of these people and like there's so much going on, and it's hard.
You're gonna run a lot more of them.
I'm gonna run a lot more of them now, and I'm excited for it.
I do. I actually have been running because I love doing it. I love those scenes, and I love to run dozens and dozens and dozens of monsters, or hundreds. I ran one with 5,000 skeletons, right, against a
Oh my
now that
gosh.
one we didn't have to worry about rolling because they set up a wall of fire and a choke point. And
Oh,
all the
so
skeletons,
then
they just ran through and then melted, and then they had created a wall of molten skeletons, and they didn't have to worry about the other ones. But you want to have the math. I know it's a very quick description of the game. You have a you have the tools in here.
Yeah.
To basically be able to run as many as, where it isn't going to be the number of monsters that's paralyzing. It's the fact that too many and you're just going to kill your characters, right?
Yeah.
But that's a different problem.
Basheer. So in your civilization section within the world building, there's a lot of really great things talking about building settlements, talking about customs and language, resources and scarcity, government and conflict. And I think as a game master, I tend to run a lot more games where conflict is between people and like in civilizations and like that kind of thing, more so than monsters. And one of the things that I see that is under your government section is talking about, but both I'm interested in what like the base of the government is, but also talking about legitimacy and talking about how that can help lead to creating like political intrigue and like that kind of if you were running a game that talked a lot more about like, court politics and stuff like that.
Yeah, so all governments view their own legitimacy in some way. They may, like, at their most cynical, they may go, we have all the swords, so we're in charge. But even that tends to be a pretty temporary thing historically. Like, if a government lasts, after a generation or so, they're now going, we have the legitimacy of our ancestors ruled this place, so therefore we're in charge by tradition, or we're in charge by the laws of the land, or we have like a civil mandate from the people, or we have a legal mandate from this government system we've set up that we've decided is how things are being run. But they all have some way of viewing their own legitimacy, and they all have some people or multiple groups of people who they're relying upon to support that legitimacy. So like a traditional democracy might go, the law says that whoever the people support is in charge, and so we're relying on our common voter base to vote for us in charge because they voted for us, we're legitimate. Yeah. Or it might go, our law says that, people who own X land get to decide who's in charge, and the wealthy have decided that we're in charge, so we're in charge. You have all sorts of mixes of these factors that decide who's legitimate and why they're legitimate. And the legitimacy section is it's an enormous simplification because, this is an entire field of study in international relations and politics and political history. But it is basically a quick way to go, okay, I have a government. How do they view themselves? Who thinks that's accurate? Like, who supports them? And maybe who doesn't? And what sort of claims of legitimacy are often supported by what sorts of power bases, historically, and how might that affect your government? Yeah, it's a pretty quick section to just go like, I have a thing. Where does it map to? How do I turn that into like a scaffolding for whatever conflicts or other stuff I want to build onto it as I go?
Yeah, no, because that's really cool, because I think there's so much in there, especially like because you get like the kinds of stories where it's like talking about like, X people are in power, but there's someone else who is like, actually, like, little did you know, I'm the cousin of XYZ, which means like now, like by law, if this were known, like now I'm technically the legitimate leader of this place, or like talking about like, oh, actually like our like, or like the transition from one style of government to another, and then like talking about like, I think there's so much juice there to be able to pull from. And I think something I haven't always thought about whenever I have been creating like civilizations or like or like kingdoms or whatever in my games, and so I'm super excited to be able to read about that and like be able to kind of go backwards in the games that I'm playing. I'm like, okay, well, I already have this set up. Why is it like this? And should it still be like this? I think it's really cool. Actually, I have another one for you, because also in your in the civilization portion, when you're talking about building settlements and talking about their purposes, I think is something that some world builders might like kind of forget. I know I sometimes like, and it's something I'm getting more into recently as I'm building like more towns and stuff, thinking about why was this town built? Why is it still around? Why do people consider this place a worthwhile place to live and interact with?
Yeah, so like towns and cities become big for a reason. Occasionally that's like, they were specifically designed for a purpose where a government said, we need a port here because that's a really nice harbor. We're going to stick a bunch of people there, and the trade comes in and blows it up. Sometimes it's like resource extraction. The gold rush founded a good number of communities, most of them very temporary. They died the moment the gold disappeared. But like if you have a resource like lumber or iron or fish, or if you have like food that needs to get harvested, there are going to be settlements dedicated to that. I think hyper specialization is something that happens most commonly with very small settlements, so like hamlets or villages or things like that, where you go like, yeah, this village is dedicated to the mine it is built around and is going to stay dedicated to the mine it is built around. Whereas as a settlement gets larger, it tends to like diversify more, especially because kind of over some threshold, a large part of what that settlement is doing is trade, because otherwise it would collapse. It has something that is not able to supply for itself that it's got to import from outside. And so trade is happening, and so it is now no longer as specialized as it once was. So even if it was once just a mining town, that might be the beating heart of its economy, but you now have the dudes who are making pickaxes to sell to the miners, or you have the people who are refining ore into ingots, or turning those ingots into finished good, or selling those to outsiders, or bringing in food, etc., chef's cooks, etc. And as they get bigger, you have more and more advanced industries in the town, but you also need more stuff coming in, and those can all naturally lead to conflict. The moment like something gets disrupted and suddenly you don't have that, there's an instant conflict.
Yeah, no, and it's a very easy way to instill conflict, right? Because it's kind of similar to what you were talking about earlier about like understanding the core of your world and your story, and then building out from there. Like once you understand the core of the settlement and like why is it here, what are people getting out of it, you can then go, okay, so what are the things that can change the status quo, and like what kind of conflict does that bring, whether it be economic or like actually like someone coming in and like creating like physical conflict over it, or even ideological conflict over, hey, should we still be doing this thing, or I think we should be transitioning to this thing because it will be better for us. That's this is going to be a good book, guys. Everybody watching, this is going to be a good book. It's going to be great. Mike.
Yeah.
I am a theater of the mind person, and partially that is because I have a hard time prepping things, and so prepping maps can be hard. And I see so there is a portion in under your running combat in the theater of the mind section that is talking about using an abstract map, and that's not really a term I've heard of before. So like, what is an abstract map?
Yeah. So an abstract map, and I'm trying to get my head. So many things. An abstract map is essentially a map where you aren't worried about fixed distances. So it still gives you a good general representation of where things are, who's next to who, where bad guys might be, where the characters might be, and all of those sort of relationships. But you don't worry about things like exactly who is it within the radius of a fireball, or are you 25 or 35 feet away. I like to think of an easy one is the map in the original Final Fantasy games is an abstract battle map, right? Yeah. You have a line of dudes on one side, a line of monsters on the other, and every so often one guy goes forward and wiggles a sword and moves back, and a bunch of numbers flower out of one of the guys. That's an example of an abstract map. Even that one is really abstract, right? Because the benefit of an abstract map, so there are a lot of benefits to an abstract map. One thing is it can be as simple as a 3x5 card, or as complicated as a $15,000 Dwarven Forge setup. So you can really span the whole range of what kind of map you're using, and still use the concepts of an abstract map. Still say, we're not going to count squares to get from one place to another. You know, are you within a move or not, right? And you can still use a lot of terms. You can even still use fixed distance terms, like, you know, that somebody is 30 or 60 feet away. You just don't have to associate that with a gridded map. And there's a big advantage to that is that, you know, I run, you know, I don't know, I probably split my battles across all of these. Although all my players are now used to the fact that I don't count grids. I don't count squares. So they're like moving 70 feet on a turn, right? Well, that's a little too far, right? You can take you 2 moves to get there. But one thing is that if you run pure theater of the mind, you know, there are some people who have trouble. It's an actual, you know, a situation called aphantasia. They can't, I think that's what it's called. They can't visualize in their head an arrangement just based on what you describe, which means those players are having a real hard time understanding where they are, where everybody else is. Even if you say, like, yeah, the 4 of you are at a door, there's 2 braziers of fire that are about 20 feet away on the left and right side, and there's a podium in the back that's got your main boss and the 2 guys that are closer to they're like, I'm lost, right? I can't get that. On the same side, you have players who cannot see. I have a player in one of my groups who's blind. So, you know, a big fancy map ain't helping her at all, right? So having all of these tools, and I don't say like there's no right one, you know, right? There's no one like, oh no, only gridded maps work or only pure theater of the mind works. All of these are tools that we can use. And that's why we offer in this book multiple tools, right? There is discussion of gridded combat. There is discussion of pure theater of the mind combat, and there's obstruction of descriptions of abstract maps and how to use those. But yeah, the concept of an abstract map is essentially any kind of general representation of where characters and monsters are. That isn't square, you know, isn't 5 foot perfect.
No, that makes so much sense, and I realize now a tool that I use a lot as someone who does. A tool that I do use a lot.
Right, anytime you're like, oh, I'm running through the mind, and you're like, can you just, you know,
draw that out for me?
And because you just put it out on the table, or you just like, sometimes you can have nothing on the table, just minis. And you're just like, you guys are here and the monsters are over here, but this monster moved up, right? So if you want to get to those guys, you're gonna have to go through these guys. Like, I got it, right? Like, there's no map, there's nothing on the table other than, you know, or you say, hey, these Reese's peanut butter cups are bosses, right? These, you know, pennies are you guys. You know,
I've used Lego figures before and loose change that we had in our pockets.
Sure,
I get it.
Sure, yeah. And just here's a little secret hint. So I learned this from David Christ, who runs Baldman Games, a huge organized play program, who said that when you use edible things for your monsters, your players almost always enjoy your games better than if you don't use
if they kill them, they get to eat them. I get it.
Right. And so that's it. You know, if you want like another little trick other than like having characters throw dudes into traps and throw bad guys into traps, also make those guys Reese's peanut butter cups.
Chip you'll never hear anywhere else.
Here's your practical GM tip for you right here today. Get that for free. Got to buy the book for the other ones.
Love it. Basheer, a lot of what I've been hearing you talk about, you and it's absolutely amazing, is that like you tie a lot of your ideas and like what you're writing about when it comes to world building to like this historical route, right? Of like, this is how things have been done in history, right? Not necessarily that we are tied to it and have to continue to do it, but using that to inform new ways in which we can do it. And like, I imagine that's so much research to be able to like understand and like, and I respect that so much. And like, I guess I'm interested in like, what was the start? Like, what was the impetus for like your like interest in like these historical roots for like world building and learning about like how people have drawn maps or like how like people have like engaged in like commerce and religion over the millions of years of human history, but like thousands of recorded.
So I just moved across the country, so I can no longer show you the evidence. But when I grew up, my dad had shelves upon shelves of books about history and theology and the like. And so that's been an obsession forever. And when I started getting into writing, I quickly realized that like it is a lot more comprehensive a set of like things to research from, to just go back. Like, so much of the early fantasy genre, you realize, was drawing from like people's experiences with history. Tolkien drew a lot from like his study of like poetic eddas in of like English poetic eddas and the like. A lot of early pulp fantasy authors were drawing on pulp history of their day, etc., etc. And if you go back to where they drew drew on from their sources, you can figure out, oh, this is what they were drawing on to make like X thing that I think is cool, or like this is what someone drew on to draw on, like that someone later drew on, that someone later drew on. It's a giant chain of stuff that led where you were, and you're going to change that in the process of making this a fantasy setting or a science fiction setting or whatever it is that you're making. But there's history is an enormous like resource of world building material, and that it is the one thing that you can be sure that everyone's familiar with at least a little bit of.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone's experienced at least some history. And so it's a common like library of information that you can draw from pretty endlessly for world building in general.
Yeah, that is, and there's so much of it. There's so much history to really look back on, and I think that's something that I need to do more of personally. I feel as like I need to find more places and more like sources to kind of look back and go, okay, I'm working with this, or like I'm trying to understand like how XYZ. I don't know. I'm rambling now, but that's I genuinely think that's really cool. We are coming to our. I think we are just at the end here, but I do have one last question for both of you, because you wrote in your specific portions the world building and then advanced combat. I'm interested in what chapters or sections in the book that are in there that you are the most excited to be able to look at, if there are any. So there's the how to be a GM section, right? Which does everything from like talking about like players and play styles, getting started, prepping, doing session zeros, safety tools, the supplies and tools you need. There's running a section talking about collaborative storytelling, pacing, how to deal with missing players. Are
you asking about stuff we wrote, or
no,
stuff that's in the book?
Stuff that's in the book
seen?
That you've seen that you're interested in, that you were the most excited for.
Ooh.
I can go first.
Go for it.
Go for it.
The Homebrewer's Toolbox is always something I like in any book like this. I really like seeing what a book has to offer to GMs to be able to make the game their own.
Yeah.
I think that idea of modifying monsters is really cool. It's neat to see the templates that were in the sample. I thought that particularly noteworthy that was in the sample chapter.
Mm-hmm.
That was the sample chapter for the book. So I'm really into that kind of advice, and I think that's one where it really serves GMs well to give them those tools, because they're going to do it anyway. So let's help them out, right?
Exactly.
Like, they're going to make, right? We want them to make the game their own.
Yeah.
And I think that so I'm very interested and eager to see what's in that one.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the advanced exploration and advanced social sections.
Same.
It's, I think, in a large way, how a lot of like modern games differentiate themselves, or I think an underlooked part of how a lot of modern games differentiate themselves from each other are the exploration and social pillars. And I think it tells you a lot about like what are the underpinning pillars of the game and what's the sort of play it supports outside of like a straight up fight. And so I'm really interested in seeing what exactly Valiant is doing with those sections.
Yeah. No, I agree. On both accounts, I agree. Especially the advanced exploration one is the one that I think I'm personally the most interested in, just because I agree. I think it is a very underlooked part of a lot of games that I have played in, and from other people like talking as well, because there weren't a lot of tools to help facilitate making traveling from one place to another that interesting outside of like random tables to roll on for encounters and stuff. So I am interested in that. But also, yes, the Homebrewer's Toolbox is, I think, again, I was talking with Sarah Madsen and Mike Wellum, who also worked on this book, about sometimes a GM or just anyone needs an option put in front of them to realize that they could take it in the first place. Because when you just give someone a blank canvas, that can be overwhelming sometimes, and people will stick to a lot of the things that they already know and use that. But the thing that I think the Game Master's Guide is going to be really, really good about, from world building to combat to exploration to social encounters, is not just giving people tools to be able so that they can use them to help make their game better, but letting them know that there were tools in the first place, that it doesn't have to necessarily be the way that they're familiar with, and it can be something new and something exciting. And yeah, it's gonna be a good book, Gal. It's gonna be a good book. Amazing. So thank you all so much for watching another episode of Kobold Chats. Basheer, Mike, thank you so much for being here. Basheer, where can people find you on the internet, and is there anything else you're working on that you want to let people know about?
You can find me at Basheer Ghouse pretty much anywhere. I'm on the site formerly known as Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. You might be able to find me as Havoc Fett if you can't find me on Basheer Ghouse on any given social media site. Besides this, I'm currently working on my first big independent RPG, Guns Blazing, which is a 1920s kind of diesel punk fantasy RPG, where you are various independence fighters and the like throughout a fantastical version of our real Earth.
That sounds so cool. That sounds great. Mike, is there anything you're working on? Where can people find you?
Yeah, easiest way to find me is on slyflourish.com. All my stuff is there, and you can sign up for a newsletter there, and the newsletter gets everything else. And I am working on a big project I've been working on for a couple of years now called The City of Arches, a high fantasy city source book for lazy GMs. That I'm probably, you can actually see the whole sort of, what it's culminated in so far on my Patreon. Patrons can see it. And I'm going to be turning that into a real book later this year, and probably crowdfunding it later this year.
That's
deep,
amazing.
Hip deep in that right now.
Absolutely amazing. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to both of those things, honestly. That's really good. I have been your host, Kendrick or Kendo, whichever you prefer. You can find me everywhere on the internet that matters at Kendo Makes Films. And you can find me here every week, same time, same channel, twitch.tv/Kobold Press. And you can also go find the VOD for both this and other Kobold Chats and other actual plays and a bunch of other stuff that we've done in the past over on our YouTube at Kobold Press. So that is that. If you haven't, you backed the kick. Thank you so much. Hey, I was just about to say,
hey, Nicole. Hi, Nicole.
Hello, Nicole. If you haven't already gone to back the Kickstarter for the 5th edition and Tales of the Valiant Game Master's Guide by Kobold Press, the link is right there in chat. It's the cheapest you're gonna get it. I don't know what else to tell you. It's you don't have to be able to run Tales of the Valiant.
Cover. I got the special edition cover.
The special edition looks so good.
I'm sad. I don't know if I got the special edition of the other two, so I think I might be in
just this
real pickle. I'm gonna have to go to eBay and buy them for $900 each to get the full collection.
So you can get all of them right there on this shelf next to each other.
Yeah.
Amazing. But yes, thank you all so much. I will see you next week, and don't forget to go out, eat enough food, drink enough water, get enough sleep, and take care of yourself, because self-care is incredibly important, especially in this new year. And I'll see you all next week. Bye.